9. The Savior Returns. Written by Celestial Rainstorm. Narrated by AJ the Elementalgod. Chapter 5. Tears Within the Heart. That night, they made it back to the house where 9 kept his friends safe. The twins were in the remains of the drawing rooms, cataloging interesting things. 9 led 7 where he kept the others, and the 2 young stitchpunks entered the room quietly. 7 stopped. When she saw the 4 bodies, all laid nearly in a row, with their hands crossed over their chests. She blinked, almost unable to believe it. 9 kneeled and laid 6 next to 5. He took his hands gently across them over his chest and straightening his key, making it look like he was only peacefully sleeping. 9 sighed as 7 stooped beside him. They remained silent, standing beside the ones they lost. Seeing them all together like this, remembering they were once full of life, made 9 feel as if his heart was breaking all over again. He reached out and rested his hands over 5's. It was ice cold, the cold of death. 7 reached up and placed a hand on 9's shoulder, squeezing gently. He didn't pull away. She was slightly relieved.
I didn't mean the things I said to you. I'm so sorry. And I missed you. I felt really alone without you.
7 said softly, squeezing his shoulder tighter. He turned and looked at her, but then sighed sadly. He didn't respond, and 7 opened her mouth to say something else, but he stood quickly, and her hands dropped from his shoulder. I need to be alone for a while. This was all 9 said before he turned his back on her and walked out of the room silently. 7 watched him, all of her feelings mixed together. She looked back at the bodies and sighed softly. The moon soon rose over the sky. This bright light illuminated 9 as he sat upon the roof. He sat quietly, gazing up at the stars shining through the clouds. There was a hollow inside 9, a dark, empty space where the others had resided. He hadn't been alive long enough to really get to know any of them, and it just wasn't fair. He'd taken away any sort of chance to know the ones who fought besides him, could become his friends. He still had 7 and the twins, of course, but they'd been together for years. He still felt like an outsider, almost like he didn't belong with any of them in the first place. They fought bravely to keep each other alive. All he'd done was wake the machine and murder them. That was just it. The others knew what each of their missions were, even when the clan was broken up. Until their deaths, they worked together to destroy the fabrication machine. But what is 9's mission? Who was he? All he knew was protecting 7 and the twins so best of his abilities. But that was it. That's all he could bring himself to do. Thinking about it now, he realized just what he'd forsaken. With one stupid mistake. Perhaps they would all be together now, finally happy. Perhaps 5 would be sitting right next to him this moment. Perhaps he could have helped him find out what he was meant for, why he was really here. He just couldn't fathom how much he missed him.
9?
A soft voice jolted 9 out of his gloomy reverie. Looking over his shoulder, he saw 7 climb up and join him to the rooftop. She walked up and sat beside him.
Are you okay?
7 asked gently. It made her uncomfortable to see him so miserable, but she needed an answer. Her hands trembling, and she wanted to somehow touch him reassuringly, to tell him it was going to be okay, but she restrained from doing so. 9 turned his head away, unable to answer her.
I will listen. I know what I said was pretty unforgivable. but I need you to know that it's not what I really think. I should have never said those things. I allowed my stubbornness to get in the way of rational thought. I only cared about protecting the twins. They're all I have left. Then I realized that wasn't right. I have you too, and I've left you, but now I know I was wrong.
7 said quietly, sadness etching in her voice. 9 felt his throat tightening, afraid if he spoke, he would fall apart. "We were both wrong," he said, shoving it off for now. 7 blinked in confusion.
What are you talking about? We're bringing them back, she said,
tilting her head. There's a hint of hesitancy in her voice, but still determination. 9 sighed, his fingers curled into fists. It was just stupid to waste so much time instead of just leaving it be. You were right, I should have just stayed. I don't even know if it will work. I just wanted to try. But it won't. It just won't, 9 said, biting his lower lip.
But we can still try,
she said comfortingly, reaching up and grasping his shoulder.
If it was just a dream, then they will really have moved on, and everything will be fine. But we do have a chance to have them back. We can still try, 9.
9 turned away from her, jerking his shoulder from her hand. He didn't look at her, and her brows furrowed.
9, what is it?
She began furry before he whirled around to cut her off. It won't work. It was just a dream. I never should have done this. I just wanted them back so badly. I took them all away from you. And 3 and 4, it's all my fault. They're never coming back. And I feel like it's me. Like I'm the murderer. He choked in a whisper. 7 blinked, took his shoulders, and turned him to face her.
You've done so much for us. I will always forgive you, no matter what,
she said fiercely, her eyes fixed on his.
You know the sequence. It wasn't something you could have made up. You were so sure of it. If we could bring them back, then it's our mission to do so. We can't just leave them there. Yeah, they were taken away from me and the twins. But you lost them too. Don't you dare think you're a murderer. Don't you dare think that I won't forgive you.
Her eyes were like fire, burning into his and seeing into his soul. 9 stared at her, absorbing her words. Something shattered within him, and his resolve broke. His head dropped, and he pressed his fists into his eyes as a terrible noise escaped his lips. He closed his eyes tightly and his chest heaved, sobbing so hard it hurt. The raw and pure emotion he had been building inside of him had so suddenly collapsed. He couldn't even attempt to starve it off again. Each sob was made of anguish and hatred and agony that ravaged to his soul. He couldn't stop himself. Each time he tried, he only sobbed harder. 7 blinked, staring at him in disbelief. He was crying. The warrior didn't think of her next action. All she registered was that the young man thought he was a murderer, and he was in pain. Reaching forward, she wrapped her arms around her greatest friend's shoulder in a tight embrace. 9 didn't pull back away or stiffen. Instead, he leaned into her, resting his head on her shoulder. She rocked him back and forth as he wept, reaching around her and pulling her closer. His fingers curled into fists, trembling into the force of his sobs. 7 tightened her hold, pulling him closer. 9 allowed her, knowing she was the only thing keeping him from tethering to reality. She held him as if she was going to keep him from falling apart. He felt as if, for a mere moment, Their souls met, and she could understand all of his pain. After a few moments, Nine's sobs dissolved into shuddering, quiet breaths. He sighed deeply, feeling limp and numb. They withdrew from one another, and Seven looked into his eyes. She wrapped her fingers around his own. He answered by doing the same. Giving her a small smile, he felt lighter, as though there had been a tank on his chest, crushing him slowly, and someone had come, lifting it off of him and enabling him to finally breathe in relief. He felt so much better than he had the last 3 months. Seven squeezed his hands gently, a gesture he returned. They didn't say anything, but stood and walked back into the house. Prepared or not, he was about to move forward to his next mission. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5.